Welcome to episode 4 of Video Games Like Blade Runner. The list of games in this episode ended up being a little bit strange, so let me explain. I have a group of games that have been on my list to play for a while now, I've just never gotten around to it, and some of these games I kind of get confused between in my head. In particular, the ones in this list today have somewhat alternate Blade Runner vibes, so this episode will kind of serve as an education for me in these games that I'm confused between, and also addressing the idea that they are not necessarily immediately comparable to Blade Runner on first impression. When we think of Blade Runner, we think of a specific aesthetic, night, rain, neon, and these games won't necessarily present as the stereotypical Blade Runner look, but in my opinion they still share strong aspects and echo similar vibes. And I'll talk about that as I go into each game. I didn't plan it this way, but this episode will feature an all-female cast, which I think adds to the alternate Blade Runner vibe. Obviously in the original movie and 2049 we have Deckard and Kay, but I am of the belief that the spirit of Blade Runner really shines through in the instances of these games. And video games, probably more than any other kind of media, have pushed the boundaries and redefined the way we consume stories, and genuinely makes for some really intriguing projects. So let's get started, shall we? The first game in our list, Mirror's Edge. In 2008, this game developed by DICE would become one of their most recognisable and iconic. Mirror's Edge is an action-adventure platforming game set in a futuristic utopian city, which sees you traversing the rooftops using parkour. This utopian society, of course, means it's simply a different form of dystopia. That's the way this perfect society is maintained through an oppressive regime. You play as what's known as a runner, someone who smuggles goods and information across the city. Going back to the beginning of the video and what I said about the Blade Runner aesthetics, this game is very much a stark contrast to that. Instead of rain-soaked nights with dirty streets, we find ourselves so high above the ground we can barely see it, and are bathed in sun and beautiful lighting. There is a distinct, clean, sanitized look to this game. Buildings appear sparkling white, and the atmosphere tinted with a blue hue from the daytime sky. This, of course, is a great analogy to utopias in general. A seemingly perfect, unblemished shell, hiding all of the ugly stuff underneath. So, given everything I've just said, this game isn't cyberpunk, is it? Much less Blade Runner. Well, on the cyberpunk front, I've heard the term solar punk being used on a few occasions, and while it does sound quite nice and sunny, judging from the name, as far as I can tell, As far as I can tell, solar punk, despite its name, is not about it literally being sunny. It's more of an optimistic genre in general. So Mirror's Edge, with its story about an authoritarian government, corporate dominance, and strict surveillance on its inhabitants, I don't think would fit the description of solar punk. But dealing with the challenges that come with a more technologically advanced society, I think can be ruled as cyberpunk, even if it's just bright, daytime, sunny cyberpunk. And I suppose aesthetically, you could more closely compare this game to Blade Runner Black Lotus, which, despite being a show I haven't seen, is still technically Blade Runner. And from what I've seen, the main character Elle bears resemblance to the Mirror's Edge main character Faith, not just in the way they look, but they both employ a fighting style consisting of acrobatically chained together sequences using their agility. I did do some more research on cyberpunk subgenres, or just the punk subgenre in general, and other than steampunk, which I'm sure you've heard of, I found out that there are actually quite a lot of subgenres out there. Biopunk, nanopunk, clockpunk, dieselpunk, decopunk, atom punk, steel punk, rocko punk, stone punk, post-cyberpunk, ray punk, lunar punk, now punk, that one's just made up. Well, all of these are, obviously. Elf punk? What the fuck? Point being, there are many subgenres and derivatives of this genre, so I think we don't necessarily have to just stick to one that matches aesthetically, not even having the exact same state of the world. Technology being used to encroach on individual rights, escaping from the police. Maybe we could technically call this soft Blade Runner, Blade Walker, Blade Jogger. Okay, too far. Anyway, Mirror's Edge, it's like Blade Runner. The next game is one that has been in my list for the longest time. I actually purchased it on Steam a while ago and hadn't played it up until now, as is Adult Life. But before I recorded this episode, I knew I finally had to get started on it. So I did just that so I could provide a little more detail to this section. In 2015, Don't Nod Entertainment would release a game called Life is Strange, a supernatural teen drama. This, my friends, is the most perfect one-to-one likeness of Blade Runner ever depicted in a video game.
I think I'm in like a mellow Blade Runner mood. I always cry at the end.
Yes, the next game on this list is Life is... I'm only kidding, it's not Life is Strange.
Man, are you serial?
I'm actually going back to Don't Nod Entertainment's debut game, an action-adventure game set in Paris, now renamed Neo Paris, in the year 2084. I'm talking about Remember Me. In this world, brain implants are almost a universal thing among civilized citizens, with the corporation Memorize creating Sensen, a technology that can store or even change other people's memories. You play as Nilin, a fugitive memory hunter and freedom fighter for the group known as the Errorists. The group, known for being extremists, were formed in order to take down Memorize, who are believed to be up to nefarious things with their access to people's literal memories and minds. Yeah, that'll happen. However, Nilin is special, as she has the ability to remix the memory of people who use this technology, effectively changing their memories. This leads to some really interesting and messed up scenarios where she manipulates people's memories to think that they have been the victim of horrific traumas in order to gain an advantage. This mechanic presents itself in the form of an interactive timeline you can scrub through and find moments or objects within the memory to isolate and change, leading to a different outcome. This element is somewhat reminiscent to Deckard's vocal Photoshop, or whatever it is he had from the movie. Yes, I'm aware it's called an Esper machine, which in itself I suppose was just a natural evolution considering he was a noir detective in a cyberpunk world. But more so, the idea of manipulating someone's memories in order to alter them somehow is of course a core theme to Blade Runner. Not to mention the distinction between if these memories are artificial or not.
Implants. Those aren't your memories, they're somebody else's.
So on this alone, it makes a really intriguing Blade Runner-like story. But what about the setting? I find something so interesting about cyberpunk worlds that don't necessarily conform to the stereotypical setting. Now, I love the foggy, rain-soaked streets as much as the next person, but I have often wondered what the world of Blade Runner would look like elsewhere in the world. What does London look like in this reality? Paris? Rome? Do they even exist in the same capacity? Do they bear the same resemblance to the towering skyscrapers, monolithic shapes, or mesmerizing tapestry of neon hues that we see in the urban metropolis of Los Angeles? Or perhaps the ochre-soaked fog and haunted statues of Las Vegas? With Neo Paris, where we find ourselves, we get an idea about one of these potential other locations. A multi-layered city, you find yourself right at the bottom, among the dirty sewers, with the mutated underclass of this reimagined Paris. I'm sure there's an optional controversial joke about French people in here somewhere, but forget it. The game itself isn't too remarkable, technically. It's very much a product of its time, from the 2010 era. This is showcased in the traversal and the combat system, which are somewhat simplified incarnations of Assassin's Creed and Arkham Asylum, respectively. But I think what really makes this game stand out, and the reason why it's on this list, is its world and concepts. Before I played this, I was considering its comparisons to Blade Runner. Was it a justified comparison? Is it a compelling argument to make? But, well, just look at this. The game even has its own soundtrack, and while it doesn't sound like the Blade Runner score, it has its own unique identity and sound in its own right, and that really speaks to the unique nature of the whole game. This next entry will cover a trilogy of games I have a rather peculiar interest in. It must have been back in around 2015 when one of my many YouTube channels was attempting to start up off the ground. It was an era of Happy Wheels, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Jacksepticeye, just a few of the things that come to my head when I think of that year. Our channel, which of course was a gaming channel, as one of the many on the platform at the time, was in the process of amassing its peak 124 subscriber viewer base. In doing research for games that we could potentially cover on the channel, I remember reading an article listing the best open world games ever made or something to that effect. And on that list was a rather obscure indie game by the name of The Longest Journey, a point-and-click adventure game released in 1999, which would go on to have a sequel named Dreamfall: The Longest Journey, released in 2006, and a third called Dreamfall Chapters in 2014. This series of games, created by Ragnar Tornquist, was a series of games where the lore ran pretty damn deep, and I feel like I want to go into a bit more detail into these games and their settings, which are a unique blend of urban fantasy, sci-fi, alternate realities, and magic. The first game, The Longest Journey, set in the year 2209, sees you play as a character called April Ryan, a young art student living in a futuristic metropolis, but who has bizarre recurring dreams about a fantastical land. Can I sneak in a cheeky Blade Runner comparison here? Maybe not. So as always, some pretty obvious spoilers for the games I talk about, but you eventually find out that your world is one of two, yours being named Stark, with its advanced technology. The other world is called Arcadia, which is a place of mythology and magic. These two worlds exist independently until something happens and they start to drip into each other's realities. Upon finding a portal, April Ryan realizes that she's able to travel between both worlds, something not everyone can do. Who said that art degrees were a waste of money? Obviously, it's the modern day world of Stark that bears comparisons to the world of Blade Runner, where we have our old familiar bingo card. Mega corporations owning almost everything, including the police, flying cars, off-world colonies, neon signs, brutalist architecture. You begin the game in the city of Newport, and in a bohemian area called Venice. And to be honest, it seems not too dissimilar to a teen drama in the opening act. You have a best friend, a part-time job, and are struggling to juggle your social and academic life. As you begin to explore your surroundings, you can catch glimpses of this really beautiful world. The pixel art style renders a familiar but unique depiction of an alternate land. The world of Stark shows a rich, deep, and in my opinion, believable cyberpunk dystopia. It's one thing to only show the depravity, authoritarianism, and general misery of a world like this, but The Longest Journey adds an extra layer to this by showing us that there's a whole spectrum of places within the city. We get areas that are a quaint, pleasant bubble in an otherwise grim reality, and that grim reality is still there elsewhere. As you travel further into the city, you'll experience the hustle and bustle, grimy streets, neon lights, violent militias, and a sky covered in steel. In one scene, you see people queuing to sign up for jobs in the off-world colonies. This is a direct contrast to the upper parts of the city for the wealthy. This game, despite how original and strange it may be, does invoke Blade Runner. And this is without even getting into the fantasy side of the game, which boasts a whole host of wacky characters and truly bizarre concepts. But perhaps I'll leave those parts for you to discover yourself. And this is a theme that continues throughout the next two games. Its sequel, Dreamfall: The Longest Journey, has you playing as a new character, Zoe Castillo. Again, another young woman. This game once again switches between the high-tech world of Stark and the fantastical world of Arcadia. And once again, to keep this video focused on everything Blade Runner, and for the sake of my own brain, as this does get quite complex, I'll be sticking to the Stark side of the world. The game begins in the futuristic city of Casablanca, and you get a grandiose introduction to the seemingly utopian city. You then also get introduced to your AI companion, a small, talking purple gorilla. This one belongs in J.F. Sebastian's collection. Casablanca itself is an intriguing blend of traditional Moroccan architecture and futuristic technology. However, you still of course have the looming threat of authoritarian governments and a militant police force with no regard for your life. There is also a device that allows you to design your own lucid dream, which is run by a shady organisation who want to use it for nefarious means. I did actually start playing this game a few years ago, although I didn't complete it. In all honesty, I found it to be a bit awkward and clunky to play, but there's no doubt this is truly a unique world. The latest installment in the Dreamfall series is Dreamfall Chapters. Again split between the two worlds, Zoe finds herself back in the futuristic one of Stark. To be specific, the city of Europolis. From what I can gather from this game, this city is the main Blade Runner aspect to it. As always, I tried to research the games as much as possible, but in all honesty, this game seems quite confusing and it goes a bit matrixy. But from what I can gather, Europolis is the main hub, and the city you'll be spending most of your time in the modern world, with the rest of the game taking place in the fantastical world of Arcadia. Listed as a city in Stark, it actually stretches across Central Europe and encompasses France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Poland and the Czech Republic. A dystopian hellscape, a mammoth city stretching on farther than you can imagine. This is part of the what does Blade Runner look like in the rest of the world question I had earlier in the video, kind of being explored further. At this point I realise I've spent quite a long time talking about 3 games that you've likely never heard of before, but I think going into depth on obscure details is something very Blade Runner. And it's also at this point where I realise how ridiculously little time I spent on Cyberpunk 2077 and the whole Deus Ex. They got a fairly modest part in my first video, and as I said at the time, they're bigger titles so they don't necessarily need more deep dives and explanations. But now I'm thinking perhaps at some point I'll revisit them. As far as episode 4 goes, that's going to be it. I'm making my way through my list of games, but I've still got quite a lot left to do. Like Remember Me in this episode, I'm hoping to actually play small parts of the games in future episodes, just to give me a different perspective on them. So I hope you'll be joining me for that, and as always, thank you for watching.